Welcome to the Midwest side, those groups that the narratively driven podcast. You'll have a fun ride. I'll be in the fall. We get so fast, dice rolling for low in this fun, never solo, no smoke to the Dogs of Warcry.
Dogs of Warcry is a new podcast from the Mortal Realms, focusing on Warcry, a fast-paced, cinematic skirmish game by Games Workshop. Join us for discussions on gameplay, rules, lore, painting, terrain building, campaigns, and events. In episode 7, we are going to talk about 2 more warbands, the Legion of Nagash, and your favorite high-flying duaradin, the Kharadron Overlords. From the aesthetics to the tactics, we'll share our thoughts on why you should consider mustering these fighters. Welcome to the Warband. My name is Eric, and answering the call with me this week is Josh.
Hello.
Paven.
What's going on?
And special guest, Benjamin. How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. We're welcoming Ben. You've probably heard us talk about him a lot and his Legion of Nagash. This is Josh's stepson and one of our frequent league members. And we're happy to have you on the podcast this episode, man. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule, your nightlife, and joining us.
Yeah, super busy ever since quarantine.
Yeah. Hey, you could be on like Call of Duty or, over LAN or something.
Yep.
All right, let's heat things up a bit, guys, with the Forge of Mithraxis, and talk a little bit about any hobby that we've been jumping into. Ben, why don't you kick us off as our guest? What have you been working on since the last time you weren't on the show?
Well, I'm working on a lot of Flesh Eater Core models for AOS. So like repainting the Terrorgeist and a bunch of ghouls.
Now, I think you've been working on this army since you've had like a full 2,000 point army for as long as I've known you, right?
Yeah, more models just sort of pop out of nowhere. Oh, gotta paint that. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. It's a signature army and fantastically painted. So I'm glad you got more on there. Paven, what have you been doing over the last few weeks?
Oh, Eric, I've been trying to really grind out the hobby here. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I'm sure some of our listeners can feel me, just like the amount of just trying to get it all in. It's really putting a crunch on that evening time. But I'll give you the rundown. So I've made actual physical progress on Gitsville, which is for my Circle of Paint challenge, but I'll talk more about that later in its appropriate section. So for my current other in-flight projects, I sent Josh a 3D sculpt, or I don't know what that. I forget what the file format is for those 3D printing.
STL files.
STL files. Sent Josh an STL file for the final Elo in that box, who's mostly painted, but I can't check off that purchase until that's done. But I'm kind of blocked there because we're not interacting these days, so I'm holding off on that one. I'm also working on these Vanguard clones for Conquest, and I don't know, I haven't painted like a regiment of a unit in a long time, and it's just really slow going. I kind of redid the way I was doing the paint scheme like halfway through. I didn't necessarily go back and really repaint stuff, but it's been real. I've been really grinding through the progress there, but I can see the finish line. Also, I don't know if this counts as hobby progress, but given what we talked about on last show, one of the things me and my wife have been doing as we've been trapped in our house is we've been throwing a lot of poop out because we watched the Netflix show, the Marie Kondo Netflix show, where you investigate each item in your house, and if it brings you joy, you keep it, otherwise you throw it away. Super on board. I haven't gotten to miniatures yet, but I am very excited to. I'm not going to throw any away. They all bring me joy. Don't ask me again. But I'm giving away a lot of really old Warhammer books and other miniature game books that I just would never open up again and just taking up space. And I'm also really excited to spend more time on my hobby space and upgrade it. I haven't actually done this yet, but I have been thinking about it. And so I thought I'd mention it here because I didn't make that much painting progress because of what we talked about on last show.
That's awesome. Way to deflect. I get it. All right, Josh, you're up. What you been working on?
I've been working on the Circle of Paint Challenge terrain, but I've also taken a few breaks and working on some dust terrain, painting up some tank traps and ammo crates, and some Quonset huts, which are like World War II type huts, and also did some casting of terrain for that. But yeah, so trying to broaden my horizons. It's mostly been terrain and painting the terrain. I haven't done any models in a while, but I'm itching to do that. I've also made some wooden platforms and walkways to maybe work in a swamp board, or also to use on top of the pillars for the Circle of Paint Challenge. So
nice. Very cool. Let's see. I have been working on I picked up a Fulmoroid Crusher as my very last Warhammer store purchase before getting stuck inside. And I told myself that it was going to be, or my plan was that it was going to be a little bit more of a long paint. Like I was going to take it up to not just my highest level that I've ever done, but the highest level that I could possibly do, taking on some of the Venturella tricks. I did some Zenithals and been doing a ton of glazing, and just kind of treating it gently, like taking time, letting it sit there, think about what color's going next, etc. I've actually made quite a bit of progress on it because I've really enjoyed it. So almost the last 2 weeks, about every day, I put a little bit of paint on it here and there. So I think I've basically got it to where I would typically take work, only it looks better than what I would typically do. And I think now it's a lot of just detail work, a lot of little highlights, and just more and more detail, minimal kind of stuff to help bring it up. Because this guy's going to win me one of those gold medals at one of our next paint challenges for sure. But no, it's just been a lot of fun. In my imagination, he's a freedom fighter. He has broken his chains and he's looking to tear down the Varan Spire. So he's rallying the Fulmoroids from far and wide. But yeah, and then my son and I have been doing Lego pirate ships from scratch. And all he can talk about and think about is pirates right now. And I'm kind of loving it. So we're having a lot of fun with that. A lot of Lego. Yep. So that's how we've been passing the time. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but I'm sure it's going to be a little bit light. How's your path to glory been, gentlemen? Josh, Benjamin, give us some light in this darkness.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we've only had one game so far since League had been put on hold. But it was fun. Ben was playing as Legion of Nagash, and I tried out the new Zine Sharkanites and ended up winning the scenario, but just barely, because I had to guard some treasure in the center of the board, and he had to come on afterwards. But he was tearing my models up. But it was definitely fun to try that warband, because I didn't have any of the models on disc, so I didn't have any of that really heavy hitters. But I had quite a few numbers, so that was nice.
Ben, what was your perspective on the game?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'd kind of gone up against Zinch in any form before, so all of his guys having shooting was very scary, especially since my max move is 4 inches. Had to work around that. It was a good game.
You've been handicapped by 4-inch moves since the beginning of Warcry, but you've yet to switch to a new warband, and I think we're going to be able to find out why that is later in the victory condition. Paven, have you gotten any games in?
I tried. I asked my my son, my 7-year-old, if he would want to play, and he said no.
I'm sorry.
It's worth a shot.
Oh man,
yeah, he's too cool for it.
Too cool.
That's understandable. I get it. My Miles and I have not played any more games. He's asked me maybe one time, but like I said, we've been playing enough Pirates. Yeah. I think he just plays Warcry when he wants. When I've not spent enough time with him. So, Playing with Legos has probably made it all right.
Uh-huh.
All right. Now, what everybody's been waiting for, the circle of paint and our updates, because to this point, I'll admit I've provided very little to this conversation, but I promise that's all going to change today. So I'll go ahead and get it started, because we always like to finish with Josh because he's going to show us up anyway. So I was able to get the backdrop, the city walls backdrop, kind of castle walls, glued up a few weeks ago. I've since taken a lot of the MDF sprues from my buildings, and I've broken them up into pieces, which is made for some pretty good like boards and that sort of thing. So I've got walkways going along each of them. It's about 6 inches up. I want to make some more at different levels. I've started building the rest of I think I built all the other kits in pieces. In fact, one of the buildings I put all together, and then I was able to take my Dremel, and I thought it was going to perform better than this, but I was able to take my Dremel and saw it in half. And then later realized I wanted it back together, so I glued it back together. This is a hard build, wrapping my head around it. I need to build some more scaffolding and stuff like that, but I've been able to kind of the one that I built put back together. I do need to like saw off a piece of the roof so that I can set another thing on top of it. So I'm enjoying it when I have time for it. Work's been pretty crazy, but I have I'd say 3-4 of the buildings together, the main platform at the bottom together, walkways on the walls. The walls I think are going to be ready for paint. I'm not decided if I wanted to do any like paper mache to kind of bulk them up a bit, or they're just kind of packing paper put together. So I don't know if I want to seal up holes and that sort of thing. I don't know how involved I want to get with the backdrop, but yeah, so there's a bit more of that. I don't think I'm going to be done by next week though, or next episode. So
we'll have to talk about that as after we all do some progress here.
Yeah. But the energy is high for it. It's sitting out on my table when in between meetings or while I'm on meetings. I do a little gluing here and there, so it's been good. So next, I will pass over to Pavind. How's your project been going?
I too have been feeling the motivation of the looming deadline. So here's what I've gotten so far. I think I've committed myself to submitting a goblin themed board for our Circle of Paint challenge, and I mentioned last time I had purchased the Goblin Town set from Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
I have picked it up and assembled it, and I've gotten so far is to using those pieces, creating a couple cool configurations, and I posted those in our Discord. Shout out to our Discord.
Yeah, look great.
And I feel pretty good about that. There's probably ways I could even take it up a notch from there, but given that we're in the final stretch here, I think I'm going to just commit to painting those up and doing a couple. I think I need to build a couple more like ladders and walkways to make it like more traversable and more real, since the Lord of the Rings stuff is all just kind of flat walkways, and it comes with one ladder, but I probably want 3 more. And then I can get up to like 3 good levels, which I really like, multiple levels in Warcry. Now I gotta just paint it all up. Thankfully, it's all mostly the same material, and it's terrain, so it should paint pretty quick with dry brushing. I kind of held off. I don't want to use. It's a lot of wood, and I don't want to use all my GW paints, so I stole paints from my children, their craft paints for painting their little projects. But to my frustration, they didn't quite have the colors I wanted, and I braided them for it, of course. There was too much red in their brown, and then I went out and bought my own set of apple barrel paints, which is just for Dad because he's a serious artist.
Pavind, I think I know why your son doesn't want to play Warcry.
yelling at him about painting and quiet. I'm podcasting over here. Go to bed. So I gotta make sure. Go ahead. Yeah, I gotta make sure I have a good recipe, and then I'm just gonna be a lot of dry brushing. We'll see how much washing I do, but I should be getting to a finish line. Should be doable in the next 2 weeks. And if we have more time, because Eric cries about it, then I'll try to take it up a notch more.
All right, let's hand it over to Josh. What you got?
Been making good progress. Been trying out my water mixable oil paints for the water on my 4 baseboards, and it's turning out well. It's a little bright, so I need to do a wash to kind of tone down the green a bit. I'm going to go for a kind of a greenish brown, murky water look. But all the brickwork is done, and I've got most of the baseboards are done themselves. I did get the second board worth of columns primed, and I'm currently painting those up. But I still have 2 quarters worth of pillars to prime and then paint. So I'm trying to figure it out. Because the process I adopted for painting them is very slow. So
wait a minute. Are you worried about getting done by next week?
I am worried about getting done.
Yeah. I mean, not that I want you to fail. Not that I want. Yeah.
So I might need to tack on a week or 2. I do have some walkways and things to do that I could put on there, and if I had to, I could disperse the pillars around the board and put something else in the middle. But I guess it depends on how complete we want it to be for voting purposes. Yeah.
All right, Paven and I will get together and we'll discuss what we should do about this. Let's see if we'll allow that extra time. Very cool, very cool. Are you happy with it? You enjoying it?
I am. It's just like with any terrain project that you kind of start it and you're going, I could have done it this way and it might have been a little better. But I was like, no, you're committed now. You got to finish this up. So.
Sure.
So, but I do think it's going to be a lot of fun to play on, and I'm looking forward to having it all painted up and getting some models on there, and then adding some detail work like some brick walls, or some not chandeliers, but braziers or torch stands and other kinds of interesting details to add to the board, depending on the games being played. So,
yeah, I find that's one of the things I enjoy. Like I've enjoyed painting up a lot of little like things that can be put on the board or not. Keeping track of them is hard. So they get lost, or you're like, where did I put that? Very cool. Well, it sounds like we're all in a place to be motivated, which means, and that's pretty good. And hopefully that we can turn that into a really nice finish line, even if we have to extend it a bit. But like what else we got to do? So we'll update. It sounds like we're unlikely to have our deadline in voting next episode. So what we'll do is we'll announce next episode what we're going to do with that, where you can find or what date you can find it, etc. And we'll set that date in whatever state our boards are in. We will present them, and all of you listening can vote and share and comment and berate whoever doesn't have it finished, and we'll go from there. But awesome, I'm looking forward to that, and then we'll have a great time. We'll have to have a party to play on them all when the time is right. So
yeah, definitely.
Let's jump over to the Visions of Madness. Paven, what has been coming out for this fine game of ours?
So we've had a couple studio previews from Games Workshop, and the big news from Warcry is that we finally have miniatures for the Scions of the Flame.
Woo!
Yeah.
Hey, we did it. We made it. 2020. It's going to be a great year. Yeah. Before I get your hot takes, I will throw mine in there. I love these minis. I think they're great. I think they are just really well executed, cool chaos guys, and I think they are going to be my foray into chaos. So whenever they do come out, I think I'm going to pick them up and play that warband. I'm super excited. I like all the sculpts. Yeah, I don't know. What are your all thoughts?
I really enjoy them. They weren't what I expected. I was thinking more like flagellants or something like that, like devoted of Sigmar type of thing. But they have a fantastic aesthetic, and flame is hard to paint. I think so. I think they're going to be a fun challenge. But when you can get it right, it looks so cool. And I think these guys have a lot of character, and I think you're going to see a lot of different flame colors, etc. So yeah, I think they did a great job of creating another unique warband that stands out on its own. What did you think, Josh?
Yeah, no, I agree. I really love the flaming Medusa-like heads on a couple of them, and I think they did a great job having some of them look like normal people. So I think they did a great job kind of reiterating that these are warbands that don't necessarily know that they're worshiping chaos in some aspect, and so I think that they captured that really well with this particular warband. What about you, Benjamin? What do you think?
All right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, like for paints and stuff. I've always thought that painting fire is a lot of fun, so that might be fun to paint. I can't wait to see them on the battlefield and see like how they work, what's their strategy, that sort of thing. And most importantly, I can't wait to play against them.
Nice. Very cool. Any other news out of Games Workshop, Paven?
Warcry specific news. I think there was a small FAQ update for adding the right what are they called? Rune marks to to this couple cards. I see somebody else will add these notes, but the Castigator Prime fighter card has the leader rune mark, and the Saurus Knight Alpha has the leader rune mark. It's kind of things I believe we were expecting I think people were playing it that way anyway. But it's nice to get those things cleared up. And I think we're kind of waiting with bated breath on like what the next thing for Warcry is going to be. I believe Ben Johnson said during the preview there's a lot more down the pipe.
Yes,
of course. It's nice to know they're not sunsetting the game. But we don't know what that is. It could be anything. So I hope we find out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, crazy enough, we're only about 7 months in, and it's been a crazy ride. So if there's more coming yet this year, I think it's probably going to be one of the better years for wargaming, in my opinion. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll jump into our victory condition and learn about the Legions of Nagash and the Kharadron Overlords. We'll be right back. Hey everybody. Everyone in the Mortal Realms crew is rising to this challenge the best way we know how, by staying home and doing more things remotely. We want to keep providing great discussions on narrative and gaming. We apologize for any sound quality issues in this episode and any future release inconsistencies. Stay safe and healthy. Our victory condition this episode is to bring focus to two more warbands, the Legion of Nagash and the Kharadron Overlords. We're going to focus on a lot of aspects of these warbands, from our feelings of their narrative and aesthetic, the various fighters available, and how they play on the battlefield. Our hope is that you see why these guys love these warbands and why you might consider giving them a try. First up, we're going to give some space to our guest, Ben, and we're going to talk about the Legion of Nagash. So the first thing we want to talk about is just your impression of the army, what drew you to it, and why you've stuck with it so long. Maybe that, like I said, from the beginning of Warcry, you've been playing this army. Let's get into that. Ben, what was your first impression of the Legion of Nagash?
Well, the appeal of Legions of Nagash for me, when they initially were announced as like one of the base warbands, was that I had all the warband models that I needed, and they hadn't been really used in a while, so I thought it'd be fun to break those, take skeletons out of my closet and do that for a warband. And it just let me get into the game quickly, and I didn't have to buy anything, so that was good.
Nice. So they let you get those skeletons out of the closet. I like it. and when you kind of initially what were some of the things that made up the aesthetic or the impression of them for you, or even to collect them in the first place?
So in the first place, where these skeletons came from was the getting started box. It had like Archaon in it, and that was my first AOS army. So up until the Flesh Eater Courts came out, and I switched over to that. And ever since then, they've just been sitting there collecting dust. I think why I originally got them was because they were easy to paint, because the main part of pretty much 90% of the model is bone, so that it made it pretty easy to paint for a beginner like I was. And it just sort of went from there. Yeah.
Very cool. I'll jump in real quick because I also collect a pretty large death army, and my theme had been quite a bit of skeletons. So I have quite a few skeletons painted, and one of the things I don't have finished up are my grave guard, which I know can be a really important part of this army. And I've it's one of those embarrassment of riches, so many other cool things, but not too long ago, I'd kind of retired the death, and I haven't brought them back out yet. But it does feel like something that would be a lot of fun to bring back out. And some of it is just that shambling, resistant, resilient, always coming back kind of feel of them, which I think is a really appealing aesthetic and kind of way of playing. Pavind or Josh, did you guys have any strong impressions from this army when it first either came out or first saw it in AOS or for Warcry?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think one of the interesting things about them is they have this kind of a shambling horde feel, where there's going to be a lot of skeletons on the board, and like you said, they keep coming back, and I think that's one of the neat things about the forest is you can't quite get them down, and it's one of those kind of stereotypical spooky kind of armies, and even I know at the initial painting competition we had for warbands last year, a lot of people had remarked on how cool it looked, this undead force, because people think of skeletons and zombies and are really drawn to that, I think.
Nice. How about you, Pavind?
Yeah, I think they're really cool. I think they play kind of well into the theme, which is like the necromancer with his bodyguard of spooky skeletons. Like they have that aesthetic. All of those models kind of play like that, and they have the abilities, which we'll get to, but to like resurrect them mid-game. So I think all of that is very cool. Like they have like one leader, and so you have like the one choice of leader, and I think it has like a unique ranged attack for like a unique magic attack for that first wave of warbands, which is cool. It's a classic aesthetic, and it's a good execution of it.
Absolutely. Now, Ben, what, speaking in general or from the Warcry lore, what drives the Legions of Nagash, specifically the skeletons and the necromancer? What's behind their motivation to be in the 8 points?
Well, the reason that Legions of Nagash find themselves in the 8 points is because Nagash, which is their god, it's in the name. He can't be everywhere at once, so he sends his necromancers to the 8 points to do tasks that are like what he considers beneath him, and that can be anything from getting artifacts to just plain on spying on the chaos inhabitants. Yeah.
And the skeletons themselves don't necessarily have a will of their own, so they're just the fodder for the necromancer doing the work. Nagash is the everywhere, but delegates quite a bit. Are there any books that you've read, favorites of yours, or have you gotten into the lore much in Age of Sigmar?
Yeah, I have definitely gotten into the lore a ton. One of the most notable books I've read just in the AOS and fantasy setting overall was Rise of Nagash, which is a pretty big book about the origins of Nagash, and that is really interesting. It takes place in the old world, and that was my first introduction into that setting. Otherwise, Legions appears in like the last of the Realmgate Wars novels, and they're the antagonists of like almost every other AOS book that you can find.
I have not read any of the old world Legions or Nagash stories, but in Age of Sigmar, there was a fantastic story called Nagash Undying King, and it was a great story about, I would say, good necromancers, a group or a culture of people who worked and fought alongside their ancestors who were kind of brought back into their skeletal bodies, which was a crazy different take on that whole existence, and puts a lot of really interesting light onto Nagash and his Mortarks and his followers and how that whole relationship works, which is a really good book to get into. Anybody else have any Legion of Nagash stories, short stories that they or novels that they've enjoyed in AOS?
Not outside those, no.
All right. Let's get into Ben. Let's start talking about some of their mechanics and their tactics and stuff. Why don't you take us through, and however you want to do this? Maybe you want to start with some abilities or the fighters or whatever. How do you want to get into that?
I could start with the abilities that they got.
Okay.
All right. So they've got 3 doubles available to them, not including mercenaries, but on their main card. So first is Shambling Horde, which allows you to pick a fighter and they get an extra move action equal to the number of inches equal to half the value of the ability, rounding up. But the catch is that you can only use it if the fighter is within 6 inches and are visible to a leader, which is basically your necromancer. Second one you can choose from is Chosen Champion. It's only available to Graveguard and the Skeleton Champion. It's a +1 to attack and strength characteristics of one fighter in your warband, and they can use that in that activation. It doesn't hold on for any longer than that. Fighters can only use this ability while they are within 6 inches or visible to the leader, just like Shambling Horde. And then the third one is Cursed Weapons, which is only available to the Graveguard and Shenshals, which are like the upgraded Graveguard. So until the end of the fighter's activation, it's +1 to the damage characteristics of their weapons that have a range 3 or less. So out of those 3, I am typically using like Shambling Horde. Really helps with their low movement. You can use a 6 double or a 5 double, and that'll get them across the board as fast as a skeleton can. And then I usually go with Chosen Champion when it comes to attack damage for my Graveguard. As for triples, you have Necrotic Siphon, which it damages one friendly fighter, and for a value of the ability, while simultaneously healing the Necromancer double the amount of the value of the ability. It's perfect for people that they're just up for killing their guys for no reason, in my opinion, because you also have access to Respite, which lets you heal at a lower rate, but it's not at the cost of one of your guys. And as for the second triple, you have Summon Undead, which takes a friendly fighter that has been taken out of action, and you can set him up within 6 inches of the Necromancer. The fighter no longer counts as being taken down and is removed, and removes the amount of damage points allocated to them equal to the value of the ability. So, this is really good for like capturing objectives and overall just bolstering your warband during a battle.
Absolutely, and this is probably one of the ones that is good to look out for. You think you've taken down a skeleton on an objective, or you've taken them out of action. You don't have to deal with them again, but they might come back, right? They might bring them back. Now it's a triple, so it's pretty likely that you'll be able to get those. It's not like you can often are going to spam that or anything, but you definitely have to keep your eye open for it.
Yeah, and extremely valuable for those kill the dagger, kill the hammer, kill the shield missions where, oh, I brought him back. You got to kill him again.
Yep.
And like you said, yeah. Oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I want to talk about Cursed Weapon for two reasons. One, I think it's incredibly good. So this is damage points allocated by hits and critical hits. So we know this is for every dice now, given the recent fact. It's a double, so it's a lot of damage on a double. And one of the guys you can use this on, the Seneschal, has base 4 attack, strength 5, twos and 5s. So that goes up to 3s and 6s. Still 4 attacks. You're probably wounding on 3s, and so it's a lot. It's a lot of damage coming out, and it's both swings, which you don't always see on the. So if you take 2 attack actions, it affects them both, which you don't always see on these damage boosting abilities. And the second reason I want to talk about is because Ben brutalized me with this move in a game we played against. He was running double Seneschals, and I just had to kill his hammer. And like I would go in there, my bounders would bound, or my hoppers would hop, and I could do a bunch of damage. But I was like really trying to piece together to get him off the table in turn 3. And then he would just counter swing with one of these guys and just like wipe my squigs off the table. Real strong, real fun game. I think that's a sleeper.
Yeah.
Although the Summon Undead one is like the thematic move that like kind of makes the whole war.
Definitely.
Yep. I definitely remember that game. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to like Chosen Champion versus Cursed Weapon, because they're both very good in their own rights, but they offer slightly different things. So when I have a model, say, that's within movement range of attacking, he has to use 1 movement activation to get in, and he only has 1 fighting activation left. So I'll use Chosen Champion if I have access to a double to get him an extra attack to make up for the movement he used. And then if I don't have to move in to fight a model and I just have 2 rounds of activations, I feel like Cursed Weapon really shines there, because if you're moving in and only have 1 round of attacking, the Cursed Weapon is much less useful than Chosen Champion. But that's just in my experience.
Yeah, I could see that feeling like since it's for the full activation, if you only use it for half the activation, it feels a little wasted. I could see that. Mm-hmm. All right, now let's talk about the quad. Why don't you let us know what the quad is, because this one's super tasty, and I think from there's probably some confusion over it initially, but I think one of the big questions is, how do you use it? When do you use it? Have you used it? Is it awesome? So why don't you take us through the quad?
Well, to answer one thing, yeah, it is very awesome. It's basically, the rule is you pick friendly fighters that are within like the 6-inch bubble, and if you have a quad of 4, that's how many guys you can choose, and then they can immediately make a bonus fight or move action. It's one or the other, but they can immediately do it, and it doesn't take away from their activations at all. So if I have my guys blobbed up, there's a lot of enemies that they could potentially fight, it helps get them into position for when they do activate, or just get another hit in.
Yeah, pretty nice ability.
Yeah. Have you been able to use it having multiple skeletons or multiple fighters all attack a fighter in that activation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've had a lot of killing blows because of the Dance Macabre, mm-hmm. And I feel its main power comes in. You're a slow-moving force, so that extra 3-inch move really helps a lot with getting into position, or just even if you're gonna get in base to base, it allows them during their normal activation they get to attack twice instead of having to move and then attack. So from it, good at setting things up.
So you're saying is that you're most often using it in its utility for movement, which is an important aspect of Warcry, getting things in the right space, etc. The dream of having the horde attack all at once on an enemy has happened, but it's a little more situational, a little harder to set up or come by, and so it's not going to be used for that as often. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Any other thoughts from Paven or Josh on the quad or any of the other abilities that these guys are bringing?
Yeah, no, I've definitely experienced the quad quite a few times, and it's a really nice tactical ability, and it's great because it works on models that have activated or not activated. So even if a model spent its whole turn moving and getting into position, then you use Don's Macabre and it gets to attack you anyway. So or maybe it chases you down and you didn't think it could reach you the first time. So I definitely think the quad is, in a lot of cases, more useful than the generic quad ability. So Rampage, even you get a bonus move and attack, but yeah, just the utility of that many models potentially getting that extra action is really nice.
Absolutely, it's the sneak sleeper moves. Very cool. All right, we've covered the abilities. Now let's get into some of the strengths and weaknesses of this army. Ben, let's start with the strengths. What makes this army work well on the battlefield?
Well, they won't stay down long during due to the summon undead ability. So you've lost like an essential fighter, you can just bring that guy back, no problem. Unless your necromancer's dead. It's a horde army, so you're gonna get a lot of activations compared to your opponent. You got super cheap fighters. The Shenshal, which is 5 strength, 2/5 damage, is only 120 points, and I'd say that's pretty good comparatively. And they have their Graveguard. They have a high damage output. I've heard them be called small trucks from time to time, and I think that's pretty true. For example, the Shenshal has 4 attacks, 5 weapon strength, and 2/5 damage. And the great weapons, they have 3 attacks, 5 strength, and 2/5 damage. So when you get into your higher tier units, they're gonna have some good damage output there. In so many models, is just a really great strategic ability to have on the battlefield, because I think it opens up a lot of opportunities that your opponent maybe didn't account for.
Absolutely. And yeah, that damage output is real high, especially compared to some of, like I look at my Rocktusk Prowlers or the Heart Eater, and man, I have not been playing in a while. And it's a strength 4, 2/5 profile, and those are 180 point models. So just on damage output, obviously they've got move and they've got a few other things, but yeah, if you get too close, they'll bite you, right? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the weaknesses? What keeps what balances that out?
So as we've heard a lot throughout the podcast, they're extremely slow. Most of the models, except for the Necromancer, is of 3 inches, where the Necromancer is 4 inches. So, and also your Necromancer is the only way to bring guys back. If he dies, the game becomes exponentially harder. Like, it's not over, but it becomes much harder because you've lost access to your best abilities.
Well, on that point, I remember a game kind of overhearing or on the table next to you and Paven playing, where I think Paven took out your Necromancer turn 1.
Oh yeah.
And you still came back and beat him on that one. So on hard mode. What else they got?
They have a lot of abilities that are only usable within 6 inches of the leader. So bringing it back to your Necromancer is very valuable. Things like Shambling Horde and Chosen Champion. They're only usable if your Necromancer is on the table. They have extremely low toughness. Their highest toughness is 4, and that's only the guys with shields. So your Graveguard with sword and shield, and the skeletons. Everything else is 3, except for the Necromancer and White King too. Forgot about those guys. But yeah, they're all, your opponent's typically going to be trying to hit you on 3s and up. Most of your fighters are going to lose in a one-on-one with most other opponents. So they're very weak on their own. You need to, like, if you just send one out, they're probably gonna get stomped because low toughness and relatively low wounds. They're good fighters, but if they get hit back, there's no one else to support them, that could be pretty fatal.
Absolutely. Now you're starting to get into some tactics or some uses for them, or the do's and the don'ts. So let's let's get into that. What are some things to keep in mind when playing this army? Given the strengths and the weaknesses, what's important?
Well, make sure that your necromancer is very well protected. You don't. If he's straggling out on his own, your opponent can, very easily take advantage of that.
I think when we've played, I think there's maybe 2 games that we've played where I've even had eyes on your necromancer. Sometimes he's pretty well hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've gotten good at that. At least I think so.
Yeah.
But
I assassinate him as much as I can.
Says the guy who hates it when we take out his thrall master.
Exactly.
Everyone's got a weak point. What else we got?
So when it comes to list building, I go with skeletons, like full skeletons or full graveguard. I've gone with full graveguard a lot, as you guys have probably seen. Mixing and matching. To put it this way, they're polar. The graveguard and the skeletons are polar opposites of each other. So I think trying to minimize your weaknesses by like bringing in higher toughness guys like the spearman skeletons or swordman skeletons to play with the low toughness of the graveguard. I found in like my earlier playing that doesn't really work out because then you're missing out on a lot of the high damage of the graveguard, or you're missing out on the high toughness of the skeletons. So I found it's just a lot easier to just go with full graveguard or full skeleton.
So does that mean then you're recommending you go with shields as much as possible for the higher toughness?
Well, for my list that I usually take, I at like a 1300 point list when we get to that point in the campaign. I usually have 6 graveguard with great weapons, which are the ones that are very high damage, but they're low toughness. And 2 shenshals, and I only bring the like skeleton spearmen if I have like an extra, if I have enough room for them in the list.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what about the spear skeletons? What makes them worth bringing?
Well, compared to the sword skeletons, I've found that they perform much better. It's true the sword skeletons do get an extra attack, but the spear skeletons have a extra inch range compared to the swords, and I think every inch counts when you're playing legions. They have the same toughness, and their damage is a 1/4. So if you get a crit, and they're causing 4 damage compared to 3.
Gotcha.
I take them if I have because they're 55 points, so I take them if I have like that extra, because why not? And I've always found that the spearmen are better than the swordsmen.
Nice.
In most situations.
Now you said there's a lot of 6-inch abilities for the necromancer, and they lose a lot on the 1-to-1. So how do you move them around the battlefield? How do you keep? What ways or what groups or what formations do you keep them together in?
It largely depends on whether like the card deployment. If my warband is spread out, I try to consolidate. And again, that also depends on like where objectives are, where like high, where enemy models are that I really want to get down. If I have my choice, I'll do like a line of graveguard, right behind the right in front of the necromancer, and then the rest of graveguard or shenshals to support on the left or right. That sort of way of playing allows me to respond to a lot of threats, or allows me to reach out to objectives and that sort of stuff.
Were there any kind of matches where there was some heavy hitters, or something that Josh brought at you, or something that somebody else in the league brought at you, where you weren't sure at the beginning of the game if you were going to be able to handle that, but by playing these guys a certain way, it turned out all right?
Yeah, for sure.
like your game with Paven where you lost your Necromancer. That's obviously a game where you were thinking, now what am I gonna do? So how did you play that to pull it off?
Well, I can't remember that game exactly, but
I remember that game.
Overall, I just sort of play to what my opponent's doing and try to consolidate my forces to best respond to what I think or what I have a good intuition of what he's going to do.
Well, to leave the listener in suspense, what happened in that game is I immediately turn 1 bounced your Necromancer with one of my Squig Hoppers using the Gloomspike quad. When I was still playing it, I guess as it's supposed to be played, which is very, very strong.
But when you felt bad about it.
Yeah, it was before I felt bad. I just thought I was playing the game good. I thought I was just like a tactical genius.
Yeah.
I think it's like a quad 5 or something, and I was able to do like 30 damage in the first attack. But Ben was able to. It was an objective game where he just had to burn the objectives, and so he just kind of walked past all my goblins and just like put skeletons on, like too many skeletons on all the objectives, and was able to defeat me that way.
Nice.
Stayed focused on the objectives. That works. Yeah.
I think Ben does that very well, focusing on the objectives and not getting too caught up on the matchups. And I would imagine because you have fragile units that you kind of have to play that way a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not always looking for like at what I can kill. I'm just looking about like what the game objective is and how can I use my fragile guys to get past and get to where I need to have them in order to secure the winning conditions.
So if anybody was kind of playing this, putting this on the table for the first time, you would recommend, sticking to either Graveguard or Skeletons, kind of, and you like to put the Graveguard on the table. You'd like to keep them kind of consolidated and close. What's your typical dagger, sword, shield, dagger, hammer, shield? Do you, like when I play certain warbands, I'll put more in my shield and try and kind of game it out. Do you have to kind of keep them pretty even between the three?
I keep them even between 2, and then I put whatever I need in the other. So if I'm gonna put my Necromancer in either 3 of them, then that's where most of my guys are gonna go, pretty much up to the limit, just because he needs to be alive. And then as for the others, in most games I have access to a White King, so I'll put enough guys as I can in there. And then for, say, like, the daggers left, I'll maybe have, like, 1 or 2 guys left.
Okay.
There.
Very cool. No, so you don't make it totally even to kind of keep them grouped, but certainly around your leaders or your heroes, you keep them tight together so they can work together. What's some of the... So what are... You mentioned the White King. What are some of the other allies and monsters that you can bring into a Legion of Nagash warband?
So you have access to the Night Haunt, Legions of Nagash, obviously, and Flesh Eater Courts. And I'm trying to remember correctly because I typically bring the White King. You can also bring another Necromancer, but I've always gone with the White King. For Flesh Eater Courts, you have access to the Aberrant Ghoul King. And I might be wrong on that. Someone will have to fact check me. And then
No, you're right.
Okay, cool. And as for Night Haunt, you have like a whole plethora of Night Haunt heroes that I couldn't even try to recall the names of. But there's a lot of options from Night Haunt that I would definitely like to look more into.
Nice. Now, most of those abilities, we talked about the 6-inch stuff. That's the wording is 6 inches from your leader, not 6 inches from a Necromancer, right?
Yep, from your leader. So whoever's leading your warband, that's where that area of effect is coming from.
So if you had a second Necromancer, you couldn't use their area or distance to kick off any of those abilities.
Well, it's whoever has the leader rune mark. So
Yep.
I'm not sure if the mercenary necromancer has that. I would imagine that he does.
He doesn't. Yeah, none of the allies have leader rune marks.
Okay, so then, yeah, and I'm looking at the cards right now. The only leader rune mark I see here is from the standard necromancer. So yeah,
Yep.
It's pretty much your necromancer that's giving those effects.
And the allied necromancer doesn't have the ability to raise the dead.
Ah, okay. Man, kind of a necromancer light.
Yep.
So what made you pick the White King?
So mainly for its triple called Beheading Strike. Let's say you have a 5 triple. That's how much damage is added to his damage characteristic. So his 2/5 goes to a 7/10. And it's only for 1 attack activations, but it's very good at one-shotting a lot of other warbands characters. So I find that very useful. Plus, he has a 4-inch move, which it's pretty fast for Legions of Nagash. 5 wounds.
How many attacks does he have again? 4?
Is 4.
Yeah, he's nasty.
Yeah.
So do you take him and throw him pretty fast into the enemy, or how do you play him?
Well, usually I find my enemy just throws their stuff at him because they have read beheading strike and they want to get that off the table. So really, he's just sort of responding to whatever the enemy throws at him.
Sometimes batting practice. Nice. Now they have a pretty wicked monster setup as well. They have both the Terrorgeist and the Zombie Dragon. Now you've done the challenges for one or both of those, right?
Yeah. If my memory doesn't fail me, they're pretty similar.
Okay.
The difference is the monster you're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that challenge go?
So you're fighting. So I did the battle for the Zombie Dragon, and how that goes is you have the Zombie Dragon, and each turn he brings on a random amount of skeletons, skeleton spears or skeleton swords. So not only do you have to try and kill the Zombie Dragon, you're trying to kill an endless wave of skeletons. And I actually know that I'm pretty sure he can bring on Graveguard as well. So really, what your opponent, the person who's controlling the Zombie Dragon, what he can do is just hide in the corner while an endless tide of skeletons wears you down. So it's a pretty hard battle, and you.
I did not do that. By the
I
way,
was going to say, when you say what your opponent could do, is that what Josh did?
I was lucky enough to have some pity. I don't think I would have won that if it weren't for Josh. But overall they're both very good monsters. I find that they're in the mid range of for point cost, and both have decent abilities on top of the standard monster abilities. And even though the Zombie Dragon's more expensive, I've just had more fun with the Zombie Dragon, and I think he's around 360 points. I could somewhere around there.
Have you brought him into a battle yet?
I have. I used him once when we were at the end of a campaign and had 1,300 points, and I threw him in there just for fun. Yeah. And he did. To say he did pretty well is maybe an understatement. That was a fun battle, and not only just because I was rocking around with the Zombie Dragon.
Yeah. Is that something you threaten Josh with when he's getting too cocky?
Yeah, I'll just go down in the basement and quickly grab the Zombie Dragon and bring it on.
Next game, Zombie Dragon's coming on. Very cool. And we've talked about it a few times where in our league, we don't see a lot of people aren't bringing monsters to the table very often. Mm-hmm. How has it played? Does it feel like it's a useful part of the warband? Does it feel like it changes up your strategy altogether, or is it just this other piece that you get to just have fun with?
Yeah, it definitely changes up the strategy. Because Legions of Nagash, it's a horde faction that you're playing. So they're taking away like 300, 400 of your points. That takes away about 6 or so models.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off. You get one very good guy, but it's like putting all your eggs in a basket. So
Does it make you want to play with more skeletons than Graveguard then, so you can kind of get that body count higher?
no, I think I'm gonna stick to this Graveguard.
He prefers offense over defense.
Yeah.
So then, kind of give us your overall take then in playing the army over the last 7-8 months. What have been some of the highs and lows, and what you would kind of recommend for this army?
Well, this has been a very fun warband to play overall. It has some very hard hitters. It's always fun to see the White King get 6+ weapon damage. If you're beginning, it's very easy to get into because you only need to get the Skeleton Warriors box, maybe the Skeleton, the Graveguard box, and a Necromancer, and you're pretty much set to go if you're not going to get any mercenaries. So I'd say it's very easy to get into. Most of the models are pretty easy to paint, and using the Summon Undead and the Venhel's Dance Macabre, that's at the perfect moments. That's makes some pretty memorable moments.
Nice, very cool, very cool. Well, thank you for walking us through all of that. Let's jump into kind of this. What we do at the end of is what are some narrative takes or some modeling opportunities? How would you envision the warband? So let's start, Ben.
Wait, Eric. We missed. I think we missed a pretty important category here, which is what are our favorite miniatures in the faction, and why is it Krell, the resin White King model?
Yeah, that's what I use for my White King. I'd say that's my favorite too.
Ben, can you give us some background? Like that one's my favorite that Legions of Nagash have access to. Can you give us some of the lore behind that model and like describe it to our listeners?
So Krell is a variant of a White King in AOS. He has this. He's just this over the top skeleton lord, and he was a special named character in the old world, the world that was, and I think he was like one of the first. I don't know.
He's a Mortar.
He was a Mortar?
Sorry?
I think he was a Mortar during the end times, wasn't he?
Like the
Mortar. During the end times, he was turned into a Mortar, but I forget how he was killed. But
yeah, he was a Chaos Warrior. I remember that at the beginning.
Yeah,
originally, yeah.
Yep, yep.
And then Heinrich Kalmler came along and raised him, and that's his origins. But and he's not a character anymore in AOS, so you can just use him as a White King variant. He might have his own War Skull card.
Yeah, he's got the black axe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Just to describe it for our audience who might not be as familiar with the model, it is a beast of a skeleton lord. He's decked out in really heavy plate. He's got this huge double-sided axe that he wields around. Just a very cool model. It is in resin, which is not personally my favorite material to work with. But I would certainly make the exception here to play with this guy.
Yeah, he's awesome looking.
But you got to give it to the core skeletons. It's that I feel like that kit still holds up, even though they're all kind of marching forward, because that's just how skeletons would be. So Haven is okay. Can I continue down?
No, because I like other skeletons better. And I think the Underworld's Warband group of skeletons are the superior plastic skeleton sculpts.
But those are a different kind of skeleton that have their soul bound to them. So it's not even the same kind of skeleton.
Yeah, those are two things.
Well. When you're using them in Warcry as regular skeletons, then you can say whatever you want about your skeleton.
All right. Now can we move on to narrative takes on the warband?
I don't know, Josh. Do you have favorite miniatures you want to talk about?
Oh.
I mean, this is a miniatures game. How are we not talking about miniatures more?
Yeah. No, Krell is definitely my favorite in the line of the Legions of Nagash. I'm a big fan of the Graveguard. I like their helmets and their armor, but yeah, Krell is definitely a nice model.
Josh, narrative take. If you were to do this army, what would your take be on them?
Well, actually, I kind of like what Ben has done, so I'll let him describe that and then add a little bit to it.
All right. So what I've done is I got another box of the Skeleton Warriors, and I also got Skaven Tails and some extra skeleton bits, and I made Chaos Tainted Skeletons, because my Necromancer is from the 8 points. He was awoken by the Necroquake. So he's raising the dead from the 8 points, so why would they look like just normal skeletons? They should have the mark of chaos all over them, because these are fallen chaos warriors. So that's what I've done. I converted my entire warband. I built an entire new warband, all based around chaos. Like, they've got chaos shields to go on top of that.
Nice.
And I just thought that was a lot of fun to do that. And I don't know if that was what you're looking for, Josh, but there you go.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yes, I like the idea, kind of like you went with too, Eric, where they're from chaos, they're from the 8 points, and then either infecting them, or tainting them with mutations, or I think that's a really nice combination of things to show that this is why we're here, because this is where the bodies were, and we just raised them up, and we're doing what we got to do. So I think that's a really cool concept.
Nice. What would you add on to that, Josh?
If anything else, I might go with like kind of a swamp-based skeletal force. So maybe they'll have a bunch of branches and moss and stuff all over them, so it looks like they've just risen out of the swamp and they're marching along to the next particular area. So just kind of more environmentally themed, perhaps.
Nice. For my army, I love the skeletons, so I kept a lot of the skeletons and used those because there's nothing like it, like them, with as many bits, with as much cool sculpts and skulls and heads and all that kind of stuff. And they go together well, and they look cool on the battlefield. And they do have quite a bit of posability, despite kind of the marching legs. For Graveguard, I did a kind of the homage, because when I was first making an undead army in 8th edition, I created my own conversion of Krell, which was, there's a Chaos Warrior model with like in the power stance with his knee up and like a stave. I put Korgus Kull's, I guess it was in AOS. I put Korgus Kull's axe head on that. I gave him a Tomb King grinning skeleton and a Lord Celestant's mohawk to make a more AOS version of him in plastic. I love the story of him, and obviously as a model and rules, he's pretty amazing. I went with the Chaos Knight models of the older Chaos Knights, Chaos Warriors, with their big heavy cloaks and capes and armor and shields, and I put just Tomb King skeleton heads on them with like they are a skull with the band around the forehead and then down along the sides, the like leather flaps on the sides, and just look great as like former Chaos turned to Graveguard. And they kind of similarly have a very marching forward. But one of the things I don't love about the stack Graveguard is that they're not that much bigger than the Skeleton Warriors. Mm-hmm. So I like having a beefier Graveguard. But I also converted a Necromancer from an Ogre. An Ogre butcher, and he's farting out spirit hosts.
Nice.
He's a gastromancer. Those are ones that I have, like, I'm halfway through the unit that I have, and they need some more TLC to get ready to be on the table. But so I went kind of and my skeletons are a mix of, there's some chaos shields in there and stuff like that. So I've kind of got the potential of a Legion of Nagash warband that's all like chaos risen back up from the dead. Paven, do you have a take if you were to pick up the Legion of Nagash?
I don't have like any like rock solid kind of fully fleshed out ideas, but you could always go like the dead version of the different warbands. So like undead iron golems, like kind of use the iron golem kit as the base, and then just make them dead with like skeleton heads and skeleton arms, and that could tell a very specific story of like the necromancer that came across like kind of a battlefield and raised up all the iron golems. Same with like Splinterfinger, any of the warbands. So that kind of like is a even more specific implementation of the theme that Ben was playing with. Also on my list here are vampires ? Because vampires are cool. I don't know if there's a conversion opportunity there. Maybe they'll first make the Soul Blight will make their way in the first order, because I think vampires have an interesting kind of interaction with especially like kind of the followers of Khorne, because they're both bloodthirsty and kind of great combatants. I don't know if you could convert, like kind of make a vampire thrall master, or one of like maybe more of a emaciated, weaker, lesser vampire, and then have like a bunch of humans that are skeletons that are enthralled to the vampire. I don't know if that's a cool idea. Yeah. And then the last thing I have on here is called Khorne's Denied, and it's just, I guess it's skeletons with their heads. So I don't know like how you really show that they were not. They weren't skulls with a skull around.
Multiple skulled heads.
Yeah, they have two heads each. I don't know. Or maybe they're all carrying around their heads. Like safe.
Yorick.
Or they got beheaded, but they were able to get their head back. I don't know if there's anything there.
They all have iron chests strapped to their like waists, and that's where their skull is, so they can't be taken.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think there's something fun there.
Yeah.
You know what? I just thinking too that the skulls box kit has some demon skulls in it. It'd be fun to add some demon skulls to a few of the skeletons you've got around too.
Oh yeah. Speaking of that, I took a Khornite demon's skull and I put that on the end of my necromancer's staff. So.
Oh, nice.
Oh yeah.
Very cool. So all in all, it seems like too, like these are you could swap in zombies for the skeletons, even though I know there is a zombie card out there. I believe, isn't there?
Nope.
No, there is not a zombie. So you could play, these guys as zombies, raising them from the dead, etc. You can really put any necromancer, or a necromancer could be made from, any model that's kind of turned to necromancy, whether that be, something from the Ideneth range or Paven, as you were saying, a vampire or something like that. You can really kind of go nuts with your leader. And then whatever kind of shambling humanoid you want could take the place of the skeletons.
Right.
So all in all, I think we're all fairly positive about it. I think one of the things, you go up against skeletons and you think they're going to be a pushover, but whether it's a great design, or Ben, you're just good at piloting them, it's always a fun game with a lot of challenges to it. So. Definitely recommend you picking those up and playing those sometime. All right, let's take another break, and then we will get into the Kharadron Overlords. A quick shout out to a few patrons of the various Mortal Realms podcasts: Crazy Cushion Pilot, Francis Vanderhuge, Klaus M.A., Rob E. Landon, Steve Foote, Tomb King Tristan, and Dorthrew, and these were just the ones willing to be outed publicly. Your support encourages us to explore new ways to contribute to this amazing community. Welcome back. We are on to the second of our two armies, the warbands, the Kharadron Overlords. Josh, why don't you kick us off with your first impression of the army when it came out?
Definitely. So as I've mentioned several times in this podcast series, that the KO are my AOS army. I've always been a really big fan of the aesthetic combination of duaradin ingenuity and steampunk, and a big fan of the lore, and it was one of the first new forces that we kind of saw in AOS setting as well. So always been a big fan of the models and the range, and was really excited when they came out with for Warcry as well. Yeah.
Paven, what was your first impression?
My first impression of the KO when they came out for Age of Sigmar, I was shocked. They were completely unexpected and new, and I was like, wow, they're really trying some new things with this Age of Sigmar game, and I think it was very cool. Like, it's a completely new aesthetic for Games Workshop. It was and just like a lot of new, interesting territory. I think still to this day, there isn't a faction in Age of Sigmar that is more unique and identifiable than the KO. So big fan.
I'm going to echo that. A lot of surprise. I did not see it coming. And I love the introduction of flying ships. And I feel like since it came out, I didn't jump on the duaradin bandwagon. Obviously, I've talked about my alternate Kharadron Overlords. But just I've been obsessed with flying ships in fantasy ever since. I think they took us all by storm. So, Josh, what is your favorite? What are maybe top 3 models that you love from the range? And let's. I don't know if you want to go with the whole range or do you want to stick to Warcry?
Maybe we'll stick to the Warcry just because it makes more sense in this particular podcast. But I think one of my favorite models is the Thunderer Leader because he has a drill bill, this mechanical bird sitting on his shoulder. And it's a typical pirate sort of theme where they've got their minion, a parrot, but they have this mechanical bird instead. And it always made me laugh out loud, and I thought it's a great model. But I'm also a big fan of the Balloon Boys, the Sky Wardens and Edwin Riggers, because I think they're just really unique models.
How about you, Paven?
So I like the ships the most. The ships are super cool. The ironclad, all dope. For Warcry specifically, I like a lot of the models you get out of the Underworld warband. What are they? I forget their name,
Thundrix?
But Thundrix, yeah, because they have such kind of characterful sculpts, like the reloading dude and stuff. Those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, I would say the balloons, the Endriggers specifically with their chainsaws and rivet guns. I love the idea of short stunties that move fast, and also they're short and now they're tall because they're flown up high. So they've kind of overcome any challenges of their past. So it's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. So Josh, what drives them? What's kind of behind? Let me put it this way: what currents do they run on? What gets them off the ship in the morning?
Well, the KO are a meritocracy, so they believe that society and every person or every duaradin in this case, you have to earn your status. You have to work for everything you get, and you're rewarded based on what you do for society. The KO and Warcry, they're the same. They're motivated by profit, and the initial quest in Tome of Champions is this experimental weapon that has been lost in 8 points, and so your warband is there to go find it and retrieve this technology so that it doesn't fall into the hands of the enemy, but then you can also use it in the future.
Awesome. So what have you been able to get into any of the lore, any of the Black Library books or short stories or anything? And if so, what would you recommend?
Definitely. I've read it all. So there's a lot of fun things out there. There are 2 main authors that are writing KO lore right now. They do show up in a variety of different books, but KO specific books by C.L. Werner, The Overlords of the Iron Dragon and Prophet's Ruin, and also wrote short story Shiprats and Guns of the Black Eagle. And Graham Lyon had a short novella called Code of the Skies, and that had a prequel story, Beneath the Rust. And those are all really nice insights into the KO culture and kind of how they work, and it has lots of fun little lore tidbits in them.
Nice. I felt like Overlords of the Iron Dragon, and when they appeared in Silver Shadow, is that right? Or Spear of Shadows. I feel like they played a little flat, a little, how do you put it? Just, like dudes on ships. It didn't feel like there was any special, like in their combat or in how they played, that there was as much tactics.
Mm-hmm.
But the Battle Tome, especially the most recent one, brings out a ton of kind of the hierarchies and how people get where they're at, and how to make your way. You talk, the meritocracies, the different flavors of the different
Skyports.
what are they called? Skyports. Yep. So I think that, but I have not read Code of the Skies or Beneath the Rust. So I think I'd be interested in seeing what Graham Lyon's take is on them.
Yeah, it's different. It's definitely fun. The Code of Skies adds a lot more insight to some of the cultural aspects too.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the meat of this warband, into some of the abilities. Why don't you walk us through the things you can do with this crew?
Definitely. So they have a range of unique abilities. They have 3 doubles. The first double allows you to give that model a +1 toughness. And I'm not a huge fan of toughness. So most of the model, the Arknaut company have toughness 3. The Thunderers and the Endrinriggers all have toughness 4. So you generally have toughness 4 for most of your models anyway. +1 toughness I don't find as useful. So I haven't really used that in the game before. The other double is the grapnel launcher, which allows a model, a Sky Warden or Endrinrigger, with a grapple launcher to essentially shoot it up to 20 inches away and then fling yourself across the board within 3 inches of that point. Really cool ability. I could see it could potentially be a game winner, game changer, but you have to have a model with a grapple launcher. And I just haven't found room in my warband to field that model yet. And the third double is just for the Thunderer leader, and it's called Harrying Drill Bill. And it allows you on a double to fly your drill bill 20 inches anywhere on the board and prevent an enemy model from disengaging. And I have used that on a couple occasions to help prevent models from getting out of combat or moving towards an objective. So that has been useful.
Absolutely.
There are, definitely, 2 triples. One of them is for Thunderers only. It's called Keep Your Distance. If they're within 3 inches of an enemy, they can disengage as a bonus action. And again, that could be useful, I think, on a lot of occasions if you're trying to, especially with the minimum range limitation on most of the Thunderers with guns, you want to get out of combat anyway, so you can shoot them. But I find the second triple is used most often. It's called Fight for Profit, and it's only used by your leader. But it gives +1 attack to all friendly models within 6 inches of the leader, or +2 if your leader is within 3 inches of an objective or carrying treasure. And so this is probably the key ability that I use in most of my games. The quad is not that useful for the KO in my experience. It can only be used by a Sky Warden, so it really limits it to one particular type of model. It's called time charges, and they get to allocate the damage based on the ability die number to all enemy models within 3 inches. Or I'm sorry, all enemy models within 1 inch, and they get a bonus disengage. So I could see it being useful on some occasions, but again, in the occasions where I've had a quad and I wanted to use it, I found it more useful to use Rampage with the bonus move and bonus attack with a 10-inch move rather than trying to use this. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's not a lot of abilities that let you do damage to multiple enemies. The Ideneth have an ability that kind of AoE everything within a 6-inch range, I think, or 3-inch range. And so it seems like it would be a really interesting, especially if they, I suppose, can your Sky Wardens have a grapnel launcher?
Yes, they can.
So if you used your double on one turn and then the quad on the next to get them over there and just blow up a group of your enemies, it's kind of a suicide mission, maybe.
But they have a 10-inch move, so you could even double move, use the
Sure.
ability, and then get your bonus disengage. So, but
yeah, Totally. So it seems it's kind of like we were talking about with the Dance Macabre. It seems like you could imagine a scenario in which you get them within 1 inch of 3 or 4, and you lay down 6 damage on all of them.
Right.
But the reality is that's, and like some quads, like it's pretty powerful when it happens, but it's rare.
Yep.
And so maybe all that more special.
Yeah, and you'd maximize it when you have a high number on the die, so that's why it's more memorable, I think.
All right, why don't you take us through then our fighter types, because the KO have a lot of them. So I don't know if it's worth going through all of them, but yeah, take us through what you think is important.
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, there are 23 cards with the KO, so there are a lot.
Wow.
Almost as many as the Skaven. And the main reason for that is that there are 4 main types of fighters: the Endrinriggers and the Sky Wardens, which both have the balloons, the Grunstock Thunderers, and then the Arknaut Company models. And all of those units can have a wide range of different types of weapons, and so that's how you end up with 23 different cards. So there's a lot of variety and a lot of ways you can choose different weapon profiles, different ranges, and of course the melee profiles are very different. So you have almost too many options to play with. But the first thing you want to start with is the leader. And there are 4 different leaders, one for each type of fighter. You can have an Endrinrigged leader, the Sky Warden leader, a Thunderer leader, or an Arkanaut leader. And of course, the Balloon Boys are more expensive, so you have to balance how many you have in your warband. They do end up with a little bit more wounds. The Thunderer leader has 22, so does the Arknaut Company, and then the Balloon Boys have 26 wounds. So they all start with a great number of wounds. And kind of focus on whether you go melee or not, and in some cases, what abilities you want. So, for example, one of the doubles,
it's time to put a muzzle on this episode. If it was a good dog, support the show with a positive review on iTunes, sharing it with friends, joining us for hobby discussions at themortalrealms.com/Discord, or leave a tip at themortalrealms.com/Patreon.
The balance.
More content is
a lot
available
of the strengths
at themortalrealms.com and on Twitter
everything
at
shoots,
Dogs of Warcry.
all except for one model, which is the Arknaut Company with the Sky Pikes. It's melee only. But everything has, typically, if it doesn't have a powerful weapon that has a range 6 inches for the Fumigator, or 8 inches or less, or if it's a longer range, more powerful weapon, you'll have a minimum range of 3, and it could be up to 10 inches, 15 inches, or 20 inches. But they have a minimum range. So I found that you really want a balance of melee or no minimum range weapons, and then longer range, minimum range weapons, so that you don't get stuck in combat and not able to use your most effective guns. You also, much like Legion of Nagash, most of them only move 3 inches. The Thunderer leader can move 4 inches, and he moves only 3 inches. But the Endrinriggers and the Sky Wardens can move 10 inches. So those are where you're going to get your fast movement. So you really want to have at least 1 on your list. And I started with 2, which reduced the number in my warband, but I found the mobility very important. Some of the weaknesses to counter that is, they tend to be expensive overall in terms of model points, especially if you want mobility. All of the Balloon Boys start at 205 and go up, so they're really not cheap to fill out. There's definitely not a horde list, and most of the army is particularly slow. You'll always have fewer models than your opponent and tend to be out activated. So I found that you really have to maximize your shooting. You have to either focus fire targets down or focus on models that have not yet activated to remove activations and try to equalize the playing field in that particular ability. Reduce the number of activations to equalize the playing field and allow you to play for those objectives or get across the board because you are so slow.
Now, you've got a lot of different choices of guns. The Thunderers have 4 or 5 different types. The Endrinriggers have a couple. You talked about kind of swapping those or having a mix. When have you felt like you've had have you felt like you've built lists that are too weighted in one direction, and what was that like?
Mm-hmm. So I haven't played. I played the KO through their main quest line, but I haven't played an extensive number of games outside of that. But my particular warband started with 1 Endrinrigger, 1 Skywarden, which is the basic melee profiles. And then I took the Thunderer Leader because I liked the flexibility of having the drill bill, but he's also got a great number of attacks, and he's slow enough to stay with most of the other warband to use the fight from profitability.
Mm-hmm.
I went with a Thunderer with a cannon because it's a really high strength attack to help mitigate larger monsters or tougher models in the other army. But then I also went with the volley gun, which is a large number of shots but lower strength. And then I went with 1 Arknaut company with a Sky Pike to be my melee guy, to stay close to my Thunderer and the other minimum range models to keep the enemy away. So I only had 6 models in my starting warband, but it was only 920 points because I couldn't add anything else.
Yeah.
So it was really tricky, and some of the missions could be quite difficult. But having 2 melee focused models being very fast allowed me to maximize getting objectives or contesting objectives, and being able to get back and protect my models as well as keep other models away so I could shoot them down. So nice. I found that as I got more points throughout the campaign, I added another volley gun just to have extra shots, and then added some Arknaut company, just some basic guys to flesh out some numbers. And I found that helped out mitigate some of that low model count to begin with. But
nice. Now, currently the Kharadron do not have allies. I'm sure that will change. Well, you can take any of the Order allies, correct?
Right.
Have any of the current Order allies appealed to you for the warband?
No, I haven't. In the campaign, they do have 6 territories, and I have not yet decided to take any allies or any monsters yet. So I just haven't even incorporated allies in my other warbands yet either. I just tend to like to play the main warband as they are. So.
Yeah. No, and some of it is themed too. I'm certain at some point we'll get cards or stats for the Kharadron heroes, fumigrators and engine masters, etc., or admirals.
Chemists and admirals. Yeah.
So, how about the Charybdis? Is I think the only hero or order monster currently.
Hydra too.
Oh, the Hydra. So there's a lot of art depicting them in the skies, but with tentacles coming out of clouds and stuff like that.
Right.
Does any of these monsters appeal to you?
I hadn't really considered. I really like the Hydra and the Charybdis models. I don't own one myself, but and since I was playing Chaos initially, I never picked up those model sets. But it would be really cool to do some sort of sky beast as like either tentacles or maybe it's a megalodon that has multiple heads or something like that. That would be a kind of a really nice themed way to do the KO for us.
Well, why don't we take that as a point? Is what was your personal take on painting them up or kind of getting them fit for the table? What was your scheme? What was your take on this army?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So they're taken from my KO, which is my own Skyport called Barak Israel Drakaz, and it's translates as "City is the Jeweled Dragon" because they discovered this huge crystallized dragon beast on a floating island in Shimon and hollowed it out and used that to set up their city essentially. And so they also experiment with the crystal and aether gold mixtures to achieve new technology and insight. So my Skyport is they're explorers and treasure seekers, trying to put things in the museum or figure out how they work and reverse engineer things. So my particular warband came from the same Skyport, and it was called Smitty's Acquisition and Recovery Corps, since they had to retrieve, this experimental weapon that somehow got lost in the 8 points. Send in the specialists, go get that and bring it back. So
nice. Very cool. Very cool. Let's everybody jump in and think of some other or from examples that we've seen narrative takes on on the KO army with some other modeling opportunities. Paven, have any ideas jumped out at you, or any that you want to mention for this army? Like I said, I think this army more than any sparks the imagination. What ideas have come together for you?
So for a long time, preparing the notes for this episode, I kind of struggled with coming up with like cool takes on the KO because they're so unique, and I just kind of, how do you, like they're already a twist. How do you put a twist on a twist?
I
Wouldn't it just be like kind of back to regular? But here's what I've come up with. So first, like we're in the 8 points. So Chaos Duaradin KO. So there's already many Chaos duaradin in the 8 points. We've seen them in more than one warband. They have a presence there. They build the weapons and armor for Archaon. Is there a version of the hats and the mustaches that you can make for KO, where they just have the kind of souped up blunderbusses and they're on their a real bad guy pirates that don't even have a code? That could be cool. I do really like the idea of ghost pirates. Always a fun theme to play around with. And then I just have like general, even more abstract ideas. So my first one is Heart of Darkness. I don't know what that translates into models, but like a group of kind of adventurers and explorers like into going on a quest like into evil, and that kind of that works with themes in the 8 points, like why like a kind of a rich group of adventurers would go to someplace so terrible, and like maybe they're doomed. I don't know. And then there's like a little lighter spin on that where I have in the notes I have Star Trek / Rogue Trader. So like the Rogue Traders are explorers in the 41st millennium in Warhammer 40k, and they establish contact with new human societies to trade with them and bring them into the Imperium. I don't know if there's those kind of missions, those kind of mercantilism style colonialism, or just trying to trade with new people like happening during the Age of Sigmar. I don't know if the 8 points is maybe the right place to do that. Maybe it's too militarized, maybe it's too corrupted, but like kind of explorers and voyagers and trying to find if there's anybody worth talking to in the 8 points. Mm-hmm. And then like the last idea I have is like as a group of KO like on a rescue mission. Like trying to a squad of lucky adventurers and ne'er-do-wells, are the only group crazy enough to go into Archaon's house and break somebody out of jail. Maybe that's cool. I don't know. Those are the ideas I got.
Yeah. A couple that those are fantastic ideas, and I like the idea of theming around a goal or mission, and and going either you could go gritty and noir or campy horror, or you can go super high tech, shiny, boldly go where no man has gone before. One of our own Paul put together the KO when they pretty early after they came out. And I know a couple other people in the AOS community did this as well, but played off the grot bag scuttlers, putting grot heads in those big suits instead of duaradin hoods, or using some of the other KOs or other grot or 40k stuff. And then Paul put spider legs on his ships, etc., which was so the idea is that they don't quite have the ability to make them fly, but they can make them walk. So that's pretty cool. I've seen, Oryx pirates have been a theme for a very long time with the 40k.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, freebooters.
Yeah, the orc freebooters. So pirates and orcs have gone hand in hand, and there's a couple of Twitter accounts that have really fantastic.
Are you talking about the guy that's doing the inflatable squigs?
Yeah, no, that's a fun one too.
Yeah, somebody's doing like very, very clean like green stuff work, doing KO, but they're just, instead of using ether gold, they're just inflating squigs.
Like the balloons are all squigs.
Paul was trying to think of his idea, I told him put squigs balloons. He was like, nah.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to see the tape in order to believe you, Eric.
You know what it would have been called? It would have been called 99 squig balloons.
Of course.
Friend or community member on Twitter, Warboss Kurgan, has done a lot with Auric pirates and put a ton of narrative work into that and orcs on airships and stuff. I have I've talked about it before, my dark elf Kharadron Overlords, using a lighter, faster, sleeker kind of aesthetic, riding the aether winds and the aether currents, more like sailing ships than like dirigibles, which is much less safe than the duaradin do it, but they like to live on the edge. What are some other ones, Josh, that come to mind, or Ben, themes for this army? Ben, if you were to do a KO army, what would you do differently?
I think I love seeing the orc or just destruction based armies. I think I'd go with something like that.
Very cool.
Yeah, I've seen some Skaven done as pirates, KO themed, and they were really, really nicely done. And I also have seen some people paint up, as Paven mentioned earlier, some ghost Kharadron. So they painted the ghost, the KO as ethereal looking. So they looked like Nighthawk, but they were all the KO models, KO ships, just a ghost fleet or ghost ships that were lost somewhere or killed and then still continued to haunt the skies. Yeah,
I like the idea of hollow suits.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, very cool. Any other, if you were to pick a realm to put KO in, what realm would you pick? Ben, if you were to let's go around the horn real quick. What element or realm would you infuse into your KO?
I forget its name, but the Arcus one, I'm forgetting its name.
The realm of shadow is
I think that would be.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to see how they what would happen when they were in the realm of shadows. And we don't really know much about that place, so I think there's a bunch of possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the skyports, Barak Mornar.
Yes, Mornar.
Very cool, very cool. Josh, if you were to do it again and pick a realm to infuse them with, which realm would you go with?
I do like the concept of Gur. I know you got yours kind of set there, but having some ideas of beastly or wearing lots of furs and being big on hunting and stuff would be kind of a cool take on it.
What realm would you pick for your KO, Paven? Can't say Shamani.
I could have predicted that the question was going to come around to me and prepared.
It's kind of the format of the show.
Yeah, okay, I'm just gonna go with my heart here. I would do Shayesh and Ghostbuster KO.
Nice.
Very cool, very cool. I think
I would
either
lore too.
Yeah. I think I'd either do Hayesh or Azir, even though Azir doesn't totally make sense. But when my initial Stormcast army I painted with silver and gold, and so I like the idea of maybe super blinged out, shiny, everything's reflective, chrome maybe, just super bright coming down and in a blaze of glory, something like that. It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Those are all fantastic ideas. Really cool stuff. Again, this army just sparks the imagination. So with that, any final words or things that you would share, Josh, on recommending this army for players of any sort?
Definitely. So again, you have a huge variety of options. So I think it can be a little overwhelming, and you do need to get a variety of kits to make it effective. You don't necessarily want to stick with just Thunderers, just Arcanauts. You can to start with, but you'll definitely want to get some faster models and then a mix of the Thunderers, which have some better weapons and a higher toughness, and some Arcanauts. You're definitely going to want to balance. And but I think if you try something out, if you don't like how it's working, you've got tons of options, different weapons. Switch it out, try something new, go with more models, go with fewer models. There's a lot of flexibility, I think, in this list. And one of the things that took me a little while to get used to was having so few models and being slower, because I had played the Cypher Lords. But also that everything shoots, and how to maximize that, and when to shoot and when to melee, and having a good mix of both. But it does, having an army where every model can shoot can be quite powerful. So I think in leagues, just kind of keep an eye on it, and if there's not a lot of terrain or not a lot of line of sight blocking terrain, that might be something you want to introduce into that particular club or environment to help mitigate any issues that could arise from that. But I really enjoyed playing them. I enjoyed the flexibility and the challenge of starting with fewer models and seeing how I could make that work.
Any other thoughts on the Kharadron Overlord before we close out the show? 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you guys for joining me. Obviously, in this this time of distancing, it's always good to get back online and chat with you guys. Ben, thanks for jumping on the show, sharing your insights about the Legion of Nagash, and joining us for the first time. I'm sure we'll have you back again sometime. And to everybody listening, hope you're doing well, staying healthy, getting some hobby in where it helps you, and not stressing out if you can't get to it either, because there's a lot of things that we have to take care of. So until next time, it's time to put a muzzle on this episode. If it was a good dog, support the show with a positive review on iTunes, sharing it with friends, joining us for hobby discussions at themortalrealms.com/Discord, or leave a tip at themortalrealms.com/Patreon. More content is available at themortalrealms.com and on Twitter at Dogs of Warcry.
Welcome to the Midwest side, those ruthless narratively driven podcast. You'll have a fun ride. I'll be in fall. We get your frost dice, rolling below in the swamp, never stolen, no, with us, Dogs of Warcry.